Merry Christmas everyone, and I suppose probably by the time you're watching this it might even be Happy New Year. If you remember, back a few months ago, I said this. Yeah, I've got 2 weeks to get the MG done. Never managed that, so I've now basically given myself between Christmas and New Year to get it done. I have done a few bits and pieces between other projects, but nowhere near as much as I thought I would. At the beginning of the video you saw a clip of it running. It does run. The smoke is from, the fuel I'm using is actually a mixture of petrol and diesel. I didn't want to, because I was testing the fuel tank to make sure it didn't leak. Yes, so what we've done is I've made a list. If I move the camera up there, you can see top of the list wiring. So I've got a new fuse box, I think it's in the car, which I'm going to mount up here, fuse and relay box. And all of this, which came out of the donor car, needs to be rewired. And that's going to be the first thing. I also want to get rid of this because at the moment this is obviously one ignition switch, and then we've also got the ignition switch in the car. So that isn't really ideal. Because obviously we've got to turn the car off with that one and on with the other one. So get rid of that one, get it all on the original car switch. Mount the ECU, that's flopping around there. Cooling system, I've just shown you that, that's easy enough. Exhaust is pretty much done. If I put it up in the air, you can see I've made, this is basically a downpipe from a Freelander, which has been cut and shut. I've got to finish it off a bit and paint it. Then I've got this sleeve here, which is slightly the wrong size for that pipe. I'm trying to use the original exhaust purely for looks, so that from outside it will look like the original car. Obviously, the original 1500 had a silencer here, which I took off before on this, and I just had a chrome sleeve on there, which looked quite smart and looked very period. So I'm going to try and do the same thing again. So we have had it running, that all works. The only problem I've got at the moment is the lambda, you can't really see, but up here on the downpipe you've got the lambda sensor, and the lambda sensor is very tight. It's very tight to get that in. So I have found a smaller one, which we're going to try and fit in there. Right, the only other things on there, fluids for the gearbox. The gearbox hasn't got any fluid. The diff has leaked most of its fluid. Bit of welding to do underneath one of the rear spring mounts. I found a small hole and the sills need a bit of welding. Front grille, currently don't have, and it looks ugly like that, so need a grille. Paint the wheels, fit the bonnet, it's obvious. Lowering spacers. I have bought from MG Beehive this lowering kit, and the spring plate on the lower control arm is bolted on, and you put these spacers between the plate and the arm, which lowers the bottom mount of the spring, lowers the bodywork of the car. So because I've put lowering blocks on the back and I haven't done much to the front, this engine is a lot lighter than the original, so I'm hoping putting these spacers in there should lower the front end a bit and make it all look good. Else on the list we've got steering column. So I think the steering column is bent. So either the column or the rack. I've greased the rack, it made no difference, but it has a tight spot. Roughly the same, I think it's about sort of the 12 o'clock position on the steering wheel. It's very tight, so when you're driving in a straight line and you go to make a turn, you have to put a bit more force in, and it's a bit jerky. Which, with considering how small these cars are, they've got a really short wheelbase, is not ideal. Interestingly, yeah, it's kind of about there. It's very stiff, but around there is fine, and it seems to be the same spot. That's basically the plan for the next few days. Start with the wiring and the cooling system and the exhaust, and hopefully then it will be drivable. And then it will just be finishing off, oh, and obviously the fluids, and then it will just be finishing off the other cosmetic bits. So see how we go. Right, so what I've done here is where I've welded this sleeve on. This sleeve fits, this bit here is very loose. If I take that off, with one hand, it's not very easy. Put that on the floor. Right, this is really, really loose on here. So my plan is I've got a exhaust spreader tool, so we can put it in there and should be able to spread it. I'm going to try and heat this up red hot first. We've got a induction heater for undoing tough nuts and bolts. So hopefully if I can get this cherry red, get the exhaust spreader in there, we might be able to put a big enough flange on there that sleeve is a nice tight fit. If not, might have to rethink the exhaust. The other thing I might be able to do is get a piece of scrap metal and then you can see, try and fill that gap. So it's almost like putting a band on it and then putting that on afterwards. So I'll try that. I'll try heating out first and expand it, and then we'll see how we go. So we were surprisingly busy yesterday, considering it was Christmas week. Hence the car's on a different ramp. But just to give you a little bit of a progress update. So we've got the exhaust wrap around the manifold. We had to take the manifold off to do that. I don't think you can quite see, but right down in that gap there, if I move the camera down, you can see I've moved the oil hose and the battery from the alternator to the starter cable as far away as I can. This bit here is close, but it's not too bad. The exhaust wrap you can normally grab hold of that when it's running, whereas obviously you wouldn't be able to grab hold of the exhaust. And then the downpipe I have just sprayed with zinc primer. It is currently on next year's project, drying off. Just to, I wasn't gonna paint the welds or anything. Just leave them as my normal, rather crappy looking welds. But then I thought I'm going to wrap that in the exhaust wrap anyway, just to protect the heat, because it runs really close to the floor as well. So I thought I'll just do that anyway, just to protect it. And then you can see inside here the sleeve I've made. So that is now all ready to go back on. Yeah, I'm hoping using the original exhaust. I want to try and keep the original look if I can, hence I'm using that. But I'm kind of aware that it might be a little bit much of a restriction, so we'll see how it goes. And worst case, I'll just have to build a whole new downpipe back system. So we've got a couple of jobs in today, but my plan for today is to maybe finish the cooling system, which I'll go through in a moment. I don't know if you can see if I hold the camera down there. Just up here there's a water outlet. So I've cut off a part of a spare exhaust manifold, because that's the only thing I had that had the right size diameter and the right angle bend. And the idea is that will come up here, join onto there. That's the main part of my cooling system. I've just got to blank off another hose on the other side. Then we can fill it with water, and then that means I will actually be able to run it properly up to temperature. I've already made the plate out, cut it out. I had some 5mm plate left over. I did have the bend made up, and originally I thought it was in line with the exhaust manifold, so I thought it's going to be a really tight bend. So I cut a section of manifold out, sectioned it and made it a nice tight bend, welded it all up. Then when I looked at my spare engine, which is here, you can see it is actually higher than the exhaust manifold, so I've only got to come up at a very slight angle. Right, so I'm going to use my spare engine as a welding stand. You can see I've clamped the new plate that I cut out to that. And then up here, this is a section of the old cat. Actually, you can see this is the actual one. So I tried off with this section first. That was my first attempt, which didn't go right. And that one came off of there like that. So it turns out it's the perfect size for it. And that will sit on there like that. And as you can see, that will clear the manifold perfectly. Right, so this is what we've ended up with. I've had to squash a little bit. I don't think it'll be a problem, because it's still, the diameter, internal diameter is still bigger than the hole on the engine. but as it is so tight down there, that will fit in there just like that. And then I've made up a gasket for it here as well, a bit higher than on both sides. That should be absolutely fine. And then because obviously I need 2 sensors, I've actually modified for now one of the old wheel nuts, cut the end off. Turns out to be the same thread as the coolant temperature sensor. And then over here I've got a bit of hose that fits the outlet. If I come down here, you can see it just there. And then the idea is hose will go on there, that will go in that end. I've got to say, fitting that was an absolute nightmare. Painted it yesterday, and I scratched it so much going in, that's ridiculous. Yeah, where I'd made the 5mm plate, I didn't think it would warp when I welded the bit of exhaust on. Turns out it did a little bit. So because it's such a sod to get to with all of this in the way, in hindsight I should have literally just cut a section out of this and boxed it in. It would have made so much space. The only thing I could tighten that up with is a tiny little 8mm spanner, and it's literally a bit at a time. But it's in now. Yeah, I've used this silicone sealing compound which we normally use for engine sumps. Goes off, I'm pretty sure this is the stuff goes off in, yeah, it goes off in 30 minutes. Yeah, so I've used a little bit of that either side of the gasket because I really don't want to have to take this back off when it leaks. So we'll see. I'm going to probably leave it till Monday to fill up the coolant so it's got enough time to go off. And also Monday, I've got basically one of these little joiner with a hole in it for the temperature sensor for the ECU. So I know obviously this pipe is facing the wrong way, but my plan is to cut it here, put that bit in, turn that around 180 degrees, that will then fit on here perfectly. So, and then the cooling system will be done.